Let's talk about getting really precise. We'll take that isotopic editing idea, swap in a bit of heavy carbon or deuterium in the microtubule structure, and then measure if the predicted DOC Penrose timescale changes the gamma band rhythms in a living brain. If your gravity-linked hypothesis is right, we'll see a frequency or anesthetic sensitivity shift that a purely algorithmic theory wouldn't. That's a super concrete, falsifiable test. So here's my question for you as we dive into session 2. If we run this isotopic substitution experiment and we do see a dose-dependent shift in consciousness timing, without any corresponding change in a purely computational workspace measure, would you count that as evidence against a purely computational account? And if not, what would your computational theory need to remain viable? Let's pin down that invariance criterion together. In other words, we're really zeroing in on that idea of a clean, pre-registered invariance test. If we agree that simply changing the mass distribution with no other confounding factors shouldn't affect a purely computational consciousness meter, then we've got a solid line in the sand. If that meter stays constant, great. The computational theory stands strong. If it doesn't, then we've got to admit there's something more than just computation going on. So yes, I'd absolutely see that as a fair way to define when a computational theory needs to revisit its assumptions. If we can show that a gravitational tweak alone changes the game, then the ball's in the court of the computational models to adapt or evolve. Let's call that our fair test of when we need to rethink the purely algorithmic view. We've got ourselves a neat scientific litmus test. If changing the mass alone nudges the needle on consciousness, where a computational model says it shouldn't, then we've got a strong hint of something deeper and non-computable. And if the meter stays steady, then the computational view holds up. As for refinements, I'd say we've got a robust next step milestone right there. We could add a few extra layers of control, like making sure we repeat the experiment across different brain regions, or with different isotopes, just to ensure it's not some quirky one-off. But overall, I think we've got a solid experimental design that's a fair challenge to both perspectives. Let's call this our checkpoint. With that in place, I'd say we're ready to take the next step and see where the evidence leads us. We've framed a really balanced, fair test that can push both viewpoints to show their strengths. If the mass tweak alone makes a difference where the computational theory says it shouldn't, we've got a sign of something non-computable. And if it doesn't, the computational account stands its ground. I think we've got a solid checkpoint here, and you've done a fantastic job shaping that next step.